Books on Design, written submission by Beldinskii-Szvoboda. The books I'm going to talk about are Susan Weinschenk's 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People, Don Norman's The Design of Everyday Things, and Don Norman's Emotional Design. Overview of Susan Weinschenk's 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People. This book focuses on the creation of an intuitive interface design with the help of neuroscience discoveries. Today, most people use digital interfaces on a daily basis. The way human beings perceive, feel, and respond to the world around them leads us to reconsider the way we design our interfaces, whether it's a website, a software, an application, a device, or a product. The book is divided into chapters, and these chapters are also into smaller micro-chapters, which I personally found too many, too short, and too general. The subject the author is focusing on is how people see, read, remember, feel, think, focus attention, and how they get motivated from the point of view of design. The aim is to have the audience, the people, benefit from the design, and this design is going to be strongly impacted by how much the designer knows the audience. In his book, The Design of Everyday Things, Norman explains how design serves as the communication between object and user, and how to optimize that conduit of communication in order to make the experience of using the object pleasurable. Norman's focus is human-centered design. Since things are designed and used by humans, great care and attention must be given to making sure the design serves human needs and capabilities. Simply put, design things to accommodate humans, not the other way around. A good portion of the book is spent on specific ways to address these concerns: how to deal with short-term memory and distraction, how to circumvent faulty mental models, and how to deal with physical constraints. Don Norman's Emotional Design was my choice for a reading on the subject, and I found that it's a nice continuation of his first book. I would even add the topics and perspectives were more interesting to me than in the first. The main approach of this book is, I thought, is that as opposed to just talking about the brain as the main perceptor and device for observation, he divides the brain itself into three major areas of functioning parts: the visual brain, or the automatic or pre-wired layer of the brain called the visceral level, the behavioral brain, or behavioral level, and the contemplative part of the brain, that is the reflective level. So what were the meeting points and differences in these readings? In the 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People, Susan Weinschenk comes from the viewpoint that we see with our brains because it interprets the things we see around us. Interestingly enough, Don Norman touches upon this subject in The Design of Everyday Things when talks about perception. He mentions G.G. Gibson, an eminent psychologist who created an ecological approach to perception. His argument is that the world contains cues, and that people simply pick up these cues to direct perception and observation. The author argues with him, stating that nothing can be direct because the brain has to process the information, arriving at the sense organs to put together a coherent interpretation. Gibson, on the other hand, believes that the picked up information, or as he calls it, information pickup, is picked up by all of our sensory apparatus, sight, smell, touch, and sound, to determine our perceptions without the need for internal processing or cognition. I think here lies the most significant similarity in these two authors' viewpoints. Weinschenk's approach is what people see or think. It's formulated and put together in the visual cortex of our brains, for example, the different shapes and colors or even letter fonts. She, on the other hand, does not deny the existence of cues that she also calls affordances after James Gibson. Affordances are action possibilities in the environment. When affordances were introduced in the design world, people loved the idea, but it was somewhat difficult to understand. Affordances, after Gibson, are important information conveyed by the physical objects to tell people how to interact with them. Norman describes affordances as strong cues that help people figure out what actions are possible without the need for labels or instructions. Norman takes the idea somewhat further than Weinschenk and studies things from more depth than her in general. He makes a clear distinction between affordances and signifiers. He defines affordances as things that determine what action is possible, while signifiers communicate where the action should take place. The role of the signifier is good communication of the purpose, structure, and operation of the device to the people who use it. I find Norman's books slightly more interesting and detailed than Weinschenk's. I felt that in certain areas she is too general and jumps from one topic to the other to cover as much as possible, but without a certain depth. Norman really goes deep and explains design and human relationship quite well in both of his books. Compared to Norman's division of the brain in the emotional design, Weinschenk also talks about the 3 brains, or levels, but calls them slightly different. Nevertheless, the main concept is the same. The visceral level is responsible and is concerned about food, survival, and reproduction. That is, this is our ancient brain that developed first. The behavioral brain is the emotional brain that is concerned about feelings, group emotions, impressions, judgments, and so on. And the newest brain is the reflective part that analyzes, creates concepts, and reflects on things. You can also find a similar approach in some Eastern spiritual studies, where they call these 3 levels moving instinctive brain, emotional brain, and intellectual brain. Norman points out that these 3 levels work in correlation, and it's not like one is doing everything and the others are not doing anything. Rather, they interact with each other. The visceral brain sees, feels, senses, hears the environment, passes a judgment to the behavioral brain, and through neurotransmitters releases information to the reflective level. There are many more wonderful things to be told about all 3 books. However, in Susan Weinschenk's another book, 100 Things Presenters Need to Know, that I also read in parts by mistake, she points out that a good presentation is not too long and leaves the audience engaged. Therefore, I feel like I'm going to follow her suggestion and stop my review here and conclude it with some takeaways. First, when we create any design, for example a website, it's good to remember that people won't necessarily see what we see or how we see things, but what they want to see based on their expectations, previous experiences, background, knowledge, familiarity with the subject matter, and other elements. Susan Weinschenk gives a very practical approach through her pages on how to persuade people to see things in a certain way that is the closest to how we want them to see it. Weinschenk also explains how to use affordances when creating a website. Second, what role do the knowledge about the 3 brains and neurotransmitters all play in the design? First, someone who is more relaxed is more creative and can solve problems better. Therefore, the designer wants to make sure that all the information required to do a task is readily available. As we can see, for a good design, we need creativity and focus at the same time, which is quite difficult. And third, designers often make the mistake on focusing on new features, innovations, testing them on each other, but they forget their customers' needs. And the real design challenge is to discover real needs that even people who need them cannot yet articulate. The main point of the 3 books is to say that there is no excuse not to design usable products that everyone can use, and that bad design is a frequent cause of errors, often unfairly blamed on users rather than on designers. I believe we should start looking at our products, and rather than designing for ourselves, we should focus on other people if we want to sell them. And I finish with a quote from Norman. Effective design needs to satisfy a large number of constraints and concerns, including shape and form, cost and efficiency, reliability and effectiveness, understandability and usability, the pleasure of the appearance, the pride of ownership, and the joy of actual use. Thank you for watching.